course, who wants to be suffering? We all want to feel good and we all want to do things that are going to help us feel better. Unfortunately, though, once that cycle starts, then there's this reinforcement of this OCD cycle and people are getting stuck.
Welcome to OCD Whisperer podcast. Today with me, I have a special guest, Dr. Kim Rockwell-Evans. She's a licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist in Dallas-Fort Worth area. For over 20 years, she has specialized in the treatment of OCD and anxiety disorders. She has extensive specialized training in the treatment of OCD and anxiety, including several behavioral therapy training institutes. She has presented at the ADAA and IOCDF conferences and provided training for mental health professionals on treating OCD and anxiety. And she's the author of the book, Breaking the Rules of OCD, Find Lasting Freedom from the Unwanted Thoughts, Rituals, and Compulsions that Rule Your Life. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I have to say, I love the title of your book. And, I think as anybody listening, I know for me, certainly, I'm always so interested to know what prompted you to write the book.
There are actually about 4 observations that I've had in my years of working with people and specializing in treating OCD. And so the first is I am really struck with how people coming in seeking out services have completely lost their sense of agency over their own behavior. When they describe the OCD and they describe what they have to do, like I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do this. And it seems like even once there's been plenty of education, and when people get triggered, often this is just something that they lose sight of is, oh, I actually do have some agency over my behavior, and there are things I can do. And so like breaking the rules of the OCD, and there's so many tools that can help people break the rules of their own OCD. And one thing that can be super useful is just simply being able to pause and slow down so that you can actually be in touch with that awareness that, hey, there's something different that I can do. So I then organized it around these rules. There are 7 of them, and actually 5 of them are pretty much based on the cognitions that were in the consensus for the obsessive compulsive cognition working group that was an international group of investigators studying cognitions and the role of cognitions in OCD. They're all pretty much represented in the rules as I have them laid out. It's just a couple of them are put into one rule. And then there are 2 additional rules. One of them is a fairly general one that is so important about being able to not fight internal experiences that we have, like feeling like you have to control all of your internal experiences. And then another point that I've noticed over my years of practice is that there's been many tears of relief shed in my office when people find out that they're not broken. So many people come in and they think they're broken because of their OCD, and there's so much shame there, either based on the type of obsessional content that's going on, but also like comments that people might make in the public if they say, watch the person doing a ritual, or just the misconceptions that is in the media about what OCD actually is. Then a lot of times when people finally do get the courage to maybe share with a friend or a loved one, oh, I have OCD. And then the person responds with something like, oh, really? I do too. I love to have my clothes totally on hangers that are color coded, and I like to have my closet color coded. And then this is so isolating for people suffering And then usually what my clients are doing is they're certainly being kind, but they're kind of like isolating, and they're in their mind they're thinking, oh, this person doesn't have a clue what OCD really is. So I wanted to write it also because there's so many misconceptions about ERP and what ERP is like. And a lot of people come in and they're like, well, I don't want to do that ERP. It's torture. And it seems like it's going to be too hard. And then sometimes people come in with bad experiences with exposure and response prevention. And so they're bringing that in also. And so I wanted something that was a friendly book that people could go to, that would combine like an ACT approach, acceptance and commitment therapy, with self-compassion, mindfulness, and ERP. And then I also included in optimizing the ERP with the inhibitory learning as well towards the end. And then another thing that's so common in my office is people will do really well, and then they're living pretty well with it, or they've been out of therapy for a year and they call back and they say, I didn't get anything, I didn't learn anything. The OCDs come back and with a vengeance, and they're feeling like a failure. And so I also wanted the book to normalize that sometimes these things do happen, and that there are so many practices that a person can put into place in their life that can help this. It can certainly help facing other triggers as they come up, which it's pretty average that might come up in the future. And then the last thing is that family members often, they love the person suffering with OCD, and they are really sincere in their efforts in trying to help. And a lot of these efforts turn into compulsing with the client, or logic, using logic, like, oh, there's absolutely no way that you could have caused that earthquake that happened across the world just because you did the ritual wrong. There's no possible way that could ever happen. And using statements like that in an attempt to help, but it actually doesn't. So what I hope is that the book is friendly to read. I kept as much jargon, professional jargon, out of it as possible. A little is needed. People do need to know what exposure and response prevention is, and what mindfulness is. But I did try to really keep that to a minimum so that there wouldn't be having to learn so many terms to use the tools, that things could just be described as easily as possible. Because what I do hope is that people in a rural area that have no access to a therapist could pick up the book and be able to follow it and gain something from it, as well as people who do have a therapist and they have a specialist in their life that is really helping them, that this would be a friendly book, as well as a family member could read it and have a better understanding of what the person is actually going to be going through as they recover from OCD.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think those are such wonderful reasons for why. And I mean, I think you're covering such a nice, beautiful, broad spectrum of exactly what it is like when you have OCD. And, like, yeah, when somebody shares, they can feel a bit embarrassed after, or kind of bad if somebody goes, oh, me too. But really, we're talking about somebody who, enjoys or likes, I don't know, same color hangers. It's like that has nothing to do with OCD, right? So, and I love that you, like you said, you're kind of blending exposure response prevention and acceptance commitment therapy. But there's more. There's also mindfulness and self compassion. And I think it's true, right? Like those four pillars. I mean, I know as a clinician and somebody with OCD, right? But I would love for you to take a moment and, for anybody listening, maybe they're new to this, they're not yet familiar how these other two pillars would work there. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I would say that one thing that happens when people get triggered is going into autopilot and you're just doing what you have learned to do from following the OCD cycle, where you learned that, oh, I got a little relief after I did this compulsion, or after I avoided something, I got some relief. Well, that is just as a huge, powerful reinforcer. And of course, who wants to be suffering? We all want to feel good and we all want to do things that are going to help us feel better. Unfortunately, though, once that cycle starts, then there's this reinforcement of this OCD cycle and people are getting stuck. So mindfulness is going to help people become aware. So that awareness here and now, present moment, being able to be aware of what's happening right now. So probably one of the first things and most powerful things that I want people to do is practice just pausing. Just put a pause. So you're triggered. Okay, pause, slow down. You can now take a look at what direction you want to go. Okay. You can do a compulsion, or you have a whole bunch of tools that you could be using. And so I'm going to encourage people to take that pause and be curious. What's happening right now? What are my thoughts telling me? What are my sensations in my body telling me? What can I be present to right now? And that is a powerful place to be in touch with your own agency. And now you can actually do something that is going to help break whatever rule you need to break of the OCD. So mindfulness of being present, how can you really make these changes you want to make if you're not able to be present? The other thing is that once people are able to make that choice, be in touch with their agency, and they're going to make a choice, now I'm going to go ahead and do ERP or something, or whatever intervention they're going to choose. They're going to need to be present during that. And that is one thing that I do describe, mainly using stories of different people engaging in ERP, because a common question is, well, what am I supposed to do while I'm doing this ERP?
Yes.
And that's certainly a common question from our colleagues as well, as they're learning how to implement something like this, is, well, what am I going to do while I'm having the client do this exposure? And there's so many options. And so I pretty much have stories that kind of go through moment to moment what the person's doing with the exposure, so people have something to refer to. And in order for you to learn from this ERP experience, you do need to be present for it.
I know also, if I can jump in for a second, because I can't help but think, like, if I was listening right now, I know my brain would immediately want to go, well, give me something, like, what's one thing I could do if I'm in that process? I'm trying to be present and sit with this thing, but how am I supposed to sit with this? And then I'm doing the exposure, and right. So
you have all these options. So, okay, I'm going to be curious. What sensations are going on in my body right now? Where is this anxiety in my body? So a lot of people are not so aware of that. So that may be a very useful thing. What is my mind saying right now while I'm going through this? Being able to simply notice, being able to observe. I'm noticing I'm having the thought. I'm noticing I'm having this sensation. I'm observing. And then when we are able to put good observational skills in, then we're able to see beyond just that obsession and just the suffering going on in that moment. And it could be that if a person's feeling shameful or They may want to implement some self-compassion. They may want to say, I'm having a moment, acknowledge I'm having a moment of intense anxiety and suffering right now. A lot of people have moments of intense anxiety and suffering. And may I stay present right now through this exposure? And then if it feels overwhelming, tapping into, okay, can I just tap into the edge of this anxiety, right where it is, and stay with that for a moment?
I love it.
That would be some options, and then noticing what happened and
Yeah.
what else happens and what else is happening. And we're not really looking for is the anxiety going up? Is it going down? What is it doing? If somebody is noticing that, that's fine. That's great. They can notice that. There's other things to notice too. So back to like, if say a person has implemented this pause and they decide, you know what, this is too hard right now. I don't have the bandwidth to do exposure. I'm just going to do the compulsion. Then I want the person to do the compulsion in a mindful way. So what that would look like is being in the moment with every single step of the compulsion and thoughts, feelings, sensations as they're happening. Because a lot of times, if people can get in touch with what a chore it is to do the compulsion, then that's an incentive as people are learning to not resist so much, but actually to learn to allow that. If you compare what it's like to be mindful during a compulsion and what that feels like and everything it brings, and then what happens afterwards, that sort of thing. And then you compare that to, well, what's it like if I don't resist this, and if I just allow whatever feelings to show up during this exposure, and I just stay with that. And then if the person has a therapist, then the therapist might give them some prompts that are useful for them. It's going to be useful to be able to identify what emotions are happening, what thoughts are happening, what sensations are happening, and what else is happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think mindfulness in general, as you're speaking, just for life, right? Learning to slow down and really be present and be with the moment, no matter what's going on, right? You can have anxiety, you can have all sorts of feelings, all sorts of thoughts. But what is it like to, yeah, just to actually be present with that? And again, I think it's a powerful, powerful life skill in general.
It
Um,
absolutely is. I have been practicing mindfulness for many, many years. I had a colleague that was a former priest that gave me the book, The Miracle of Mindfulness by Thich Nhat Hanh, and it was the most powerful book and most
mm,
influential book. So it still remains one of one of my favorite books, actually.
I love it.
It's so helpful. And I love having people practice different informal strategies for mindfulness. A lot of people say, my mind's too chatty, I can't do it. And well, we can increase our capacity to deal with things moment to moment, regardless of whether it's a pleasant one or a difficult moment. By being present, we're going to make better decisions if we're fully present to what's going on. And so if people are really having a difficult time with staying present with ERP, or with just noticing when they're getting into autopilot and they're just going straight into this compulsion that they really don't want to be doing, and they get in the middle of it and wonder, okay, how did I get here? It's so automatic. So breaking that up and slowing things down and being more present and being more aware. And then I think that also helps with identifying, well, what is important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In this, and in going back to the book that you wrote, I do want to ask because I think it's an interesting question because it's a book of rules, right? There's the rules we want to break. I'm sure anybody listening with OCD, we can all relate. We do sometimes get very rigid in terms of how we feel we have to be or the things we feel we need, etc. So, with that in mind, what rule would you say is the most important from your perspective to focus on or try to break?
Okay. I think that there's one rule that has a little bit of a leading edge, and it's only because it's such a fundamental one. I think it might end up being different for each individual.
Mm.
So, for some individuals, they may really need to work on like the rule that has to do with being responsible for everything. And other people may need to really work uncertainty uh, or perfectionism, or if they have a lot of sensations and anxiety sensitivity, they may need to work that rule. Rules that would apply for everyone, whether they have OCD or not. And certainly as far as having OCD, how this might present is the rule that you must control your internal experiences. And so as we've been talking, then it's like what you resist keeps persisting. It's a counterintuitive kind of a thing. And when you resist, then you can really notice there's a battle within yourself. And it tends to create more of a focus on whatever the trigger is. And that becomes bigger, and it becomes something that maybe somebody is seeing everywhere. Like if the trigger is something like blood, and oh, that spot on the sidewalk, I'm sure it was blood. This spot here, I'm sure it was blood. And then it becomes much more of a focus as you're battling within yourself. So it is quite counterintuitive, and our best thing to do, and the title of the chapter about this rule is Practice Principles of Aikido. And so I think this is the chapter that describes things like acceptance, curiosity, mindfulness, and how you can actually, rather than fighting, how you can actually work with whatever that triggering thought is. So Aikido, I'm using it metaphorically, of course. It is very much it's a Japanese martial art. And rather than like if somebody were going to come and start to punch you, and the first thing that would probably come up instinctively would be to throw a punch back. And that may throw you off balance. Well, Aikido has a lot of movements in it that are like spherical, okay? And they basically redirect that energy. So if we were to do a 180-degree pivot to whatever's coming at us, then that's going to put us shoulder to shoulder with it, okay? And this is actually a pretty powerful position to be in. So if you're walking through life and you notice that OCD trigger, and rather than going straight into the compulsion, pause and you say, I have an opportunity to learn here. And you then pivot in a direction where you are allowing the OCD to just be there. The obsession is there, and you are choosing to do what you want to do, that's meaningful to you, and what's important to you.
I love it.
And you can do that with the OCD right at your side. So that's the goal, to eventually get to where you can pivot with these different tools that you're going to use and be aware of in the present moment, so that you can use these different tools to then allow whatever that disturbance is that you're feeling, and go ahead and keep moving in the direction that you want to be going, that's important to you. And so this can be done in many, many different ways. Certainly, it can be that when an OCD thought happens, like, well, if you don't go check that door, maybe somebody will break in and kill the dog, to be able to say in response to that, oh, thank you. You're working pretty hard, mind. And I've got this. I'm going to keep going. So that would be a response that would be consistent with like using the Aikido metaphor.
How exciting. That sounds so cool. I mean, anybody listening right now, I tell you, I think you need to get out there and get this book. I'm going to, of course, include all the links in the show notes, but I absolutely think you've got to get this book. What cool concepts. And I love that you have broken it down, as you said, to take out a lot of the kind of professional mental health jargon, because for the everyday person, we don't need that, right? We need something that's easy and accessible. And sounds like there's great examples through also other kind of case studies you share. So I think this will be phenomenal. And before we wrap up, I'd love to, as I like to ask sometimes, what would be something you'd like to leave our guests with? Or, of course, any other plugins in terms of other things you're working on?
Well, I think that one thing we could end with is that you can live your life with passion, even though OCD shows up sometimes. And we can use passion as an acronym, okay? And the P stands for pause, pivot, and proceed toward what's important to you. And the A stands for accept your internal and external experiences as they show up. The S is strengthen your stance, stand tall, keep your sternum lifted and your shoulders back, and step in the direction you would like. And the other S, self-compassion practice and self-care are fundamental. The I, invite opportunities to practice exposure and open up to new experiences with curiosity, regardless of your discomfort. The O is observe your thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And the N is now stay present and aware, and be aware of the mental time travel that can often happen in your mind when your mind goes to the past and the future.
I love this. So again, if you guys heard, live life with passion. And I love that acronym. You have so many goodies you gave us today. So if somebody wants to find you, what would be a one place where they can find you?
I think my website, because it has links to the book, it has links to all the social media. It's www.ocdanxietydallas.com. Yeah, OCDanxietydallas.com.
Amazing. And again, that will all be included in the show notes. I know you also have an Instagram, and I will make sure to include your Amazon link for breaking the rules of OCD. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I really enjoyed visiting with you about this.